Today, looking at Africentric approaches in social work practice, how Afrocentric assessment can be used alongside mainstream clinical approaches, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, motivation interviewing, crisis intervention, and solution-focused therapy. And one of the biggest themes that come through in the material is that Afrocentric practice does not necessarily require social workers to throw out the clinical models already in use. It's kind of just asking us to reconsider the lens through which those models are applied. So it describes this as reconstituting clinical practice through Afrocentric relational ontology, cultural epistemology, and cultural consciousness. And mainstream models may need expansion because, while useful, they're often developed from traditions that place too much emphasis on the individual, and distress may be understood primarily in terms of cognition or emotional regulation, which obviously matter, but an Afrocentric perspective asks us what may be missing when we stop the assessment there. Um, So for African descended clients in particular, there are experiences of racism, institutional exclusion, migration, and cultural identity that are all shaping these psychological distresses. And the textbook argues that these factors are underemphasized when assessment is focused too narrowly on the individual. Outside of centric social work that supports this broader belief. So one of the articles we actually looked at culturally adapted CBT with South Asian communities, and participants described therapy as less useful when clinicians fail to understand things like family dynamics, cultural values, immigration, language, and other socio-political realities. So even though that study focused on a different cultural population, I think it demonstrates really well that there is a larger problem. A clinical model may be evidence-based and still be incomplete if the context is being ignored. And the textbook describes a three-part process. First, the practitioner identifies cognition using ordinary CBT skills. Next, they map the cultural and structural context surrounding that. And lastly, recognition, reconstruction includes things like identity affirmation, structural reframing, cultural narratives, and recognition of strengths. So instead of automatically locating the problem inside the client's thinking, the social worker determines whether that thinking is partially reflective of an actual environment the client is navigating. The article disagreeing employees and gives us a more redundant example of this approach. Um, so the client moves between the homes of the mother, grandmother, and aunts, and that could potentially be interpreted for deficit plans as instability or inconsistent caregiving. But instead, the clinician recognized that her extended kinship network was a genuine source of care and coping. So the researchers described that fluid family structure as an enactment of culture rather than something that needed to be pathologized. And race was also openly discussed during therapy, and the authors point out that had the clinician avoided discussions of race and identity, she would have missed important parts of how the client understood herself and navigated everyday social situations. So motivational interviewing is another interesting example because it deals really heavily with ambivalence and readiness for change. In a conventional framework, someone might say, I want to work, but I don't feel ready yet. And um, so Afrocentric, in my mind, retains the idea, but expands the vision. So instead of only asking, why isn't this person ready, it asks, what makes readiness qualified for this person's actual life? And the textbook describes family financial responsibilities, migration experiences, foreign credentials, discrimination, and concerns about belonging within predominantly white institutions. And under these circumstances, we can see that hesitation doesn't represent laziness, resistance, or poor motivation. It may actually be a rational form of caution. Another solid example would be someone with professional qualifications immigrating to Canada with credentials that are no longer recognized. And they might be worried about starting from zero, providing financially to family members, and encountering discrimination in a completely new labor market. And just wanting that person to become more confident obviously misses the entire issue. Africentric MI builds change talk through relationships and meaning. The practitioner might explore family hopes, community support, culturally relevant mentors, and how achievement goal is going to contribute to collective well-being and also their transition into a new job. So, in crisis intervention, immediate safety still comes first. Like a social worker still has to complete appropriate risk assessment, use de-escalation strategies, respond to suicidal ideation when present, and develop a safety plan, which is explicitly stated that this clinical foundation isn't bypassed. But what Afrocentric practice changes of what happens around that immediate stabilization. So it's not understood on an individual psychological breakdown level. It's kind of understood as a disruption within relationships and interconnected systems. And this is described as relational containment and includes collective safety planning where it is appropriate and desired by the clients. And here we see that the goal is both protecting the individual while strengthening the network of safety around them. And so there is Africentric assessment and solution focused therapy. It has natural similarities with Africentric practice because it focuses on strengths, possibilities, and future goals. And however, it expands what we mean by both strength and solution. Where a conventional solution focused question might ask the client what their life would look like if things improved. An Africentric version can extend it. What would well-being look like for your family? Who contributes to your freedom and your growth? What strengths of your family or community could you use to survive difficult circumstances? Rather than assuming that a successful outcome is primarily individual achievement, solutions include family well-being. They include cultural identity and community connection, intergenerational strength, and collective resilience. And as well, strength doesn't only mean that the client has individually learned to cope better. It includes knowledge passed through generations. It includes the family support networks, whether they're engaging in cultural practices, spirituality, resistance, or the ability to navigate difficult institutions, which is a big thing. And this shifts the client away from being viewed as somebody waiting for the professional to provide a solution. And the practitioner is also looking for solutions and knowledge that already exist within the person's relational world. The team emphasizes relational existence and interconnectedness, which I think plays into that. And it's summarized by the idea that we're in because we are. Lukama also emphasizes kinship and relational interdependence, and these ideas change the way we understand well-being. Overall, I think that by situating threats behaviors within family, cultural, historical, or structural realities, Afrocentric assessment helps practitioners avoid interpreting responses to racism or exclusion as evidence of individual dysfunction. A person's hesitation may be shaped by discrimination, and negative thought may have developed through repeated exclusion, and a family structure that looks unconventional through Western lens may actually be an important system of care. And a crisis may involve the breakdown of community and belonging as much as individual symptoms. And the techniques of CBT, motivational interviewing, crisis intervention, and solution-focused therapy remain useful, but they become more culturally responsive and structurally informed when the person is understood as connected to their families, their communities, history, culture, and institutions. So for me, the main question becomes less what is wrong with the person and more what has shaped this experience, what continues to shape it, what strengths already exist, and what needs to change around the person as well.